Hi everyone, welcome to the talk show Cyber Talk with Nikolai. Today we're going to discuss a little bit more about what we started last week when I had conversation with Suchins regarding on zero trust and identities. So we scratched a little bit of a surface last week. Right now I have a very special guest in the audience and we're going to dive really deep and help you to understand what zero trust is and what it's all about and how we can integrate with identity and what is the best way to approach the situation and how you can slice it and dice it and move forward with zero trust. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Shahid Zadeh. So he is the CEO and founder of company Accepta, and I'd like to give him opportunity to talk a little bit about himself and the company and the idea that started the company. So I think you'll find it a lot of interesting in what he has to say.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, and hello to everyone. I'm Shahid Zadeh, and actually Accepta just recently has been acquired by our parent company, Secure Auth, is actually the company that owns Accepta right now. And in this new role, I'm acting as the CTO of the company, setting the vision for Secure Auth going forward with our next generation products, which is basically based on continuous authentication. A little bit about myself. I actually wasn't in security nor in IT world. I was a chip designer and a computer architect for Intel for 25 years. The last 10 years of my career at Intel, I focused a little bit more on security, and then from the chip level to firmware to application level, and then finally to identity. We started a company named Accepta, which, as I said, was acquired by Secure Auth. And the context and the promise of Accepta is the passwordless continuous authentication, where we leverage the digital journey of the users and the behavior that they have during that journey to be actually a source of truth to identify the identity of the claim identities that they have, to make sure that no bad actors can get into the system. So that's a little bit about me. I live in Portland, Oregon, and that's where we were originally headquartered, but Secure Auth is actually headquartered here in beautiful California. We have an office in Irvine.
Yep, we came here to get some sunshine, right?
Sunshine, exactly. the grayness. I was just saying to the crew that there's two colors in Portland. It's the sky is gray, and the ground is beautiful green. So one compensates for the other one, but absolutely, sunshine of California is bar none, no replacement.
All right. So thank you, Shahrokh, for the introduction. And I think once we start digging deep into zero trust, first question would come to mind, like anything else in this world, especially in cyberspace. When you look at how many buzzwords people throw around, in many cases, zero trust has been probably thrown around for at least a couple years, at least for right now. And the moment our government introduced the concept to say, yes, here's executive order and you guys need to move to zero trust, you go on the market and see almost every company is trying to sell zero trust. But I think we all know that zero trust is not just buzzwords, it's a little bit more. And so in your opinion, Shahrokh, what does it mean for a company to start this journey or embark on zero trust? What is the concept behind it?
I think people, the way that we loosely talk about zero trust is what prompts people to think that this is a buzzword. Truly, it is not just a buzzword. It is a solid framework where all of us in the IT community have been following for over a decade, since Forrester originally came up with the framework of zero trust. And it is a combination of processes, rule-based and role-based and adaptive technologies that keeps track of the journey of the users, and not necessarily users, also non-user identities, machine to machine as well, and activities where you basically need to continuously check and maintain the hygiene of the system that you have in. from the network to the identity to the SSO to post-authorization, and then, of course, the analytics part, which comes before authentication and authorization and even post-authorization. It is a inclusive of all the components of your system from the moment that the person's digital journey starts. And from my view, it's a collection of technologies that guarantees that the hygiene of the digital journey of the person or non-person, basically machines and transactions, are maintained with a high level of assurance. So that's what Zero Trust is. It's a framework with aggregate of subcomponents. A lot of people go and they talk about trust but verify, but you also need to watch out for that old expression from Reagan, that trust but verify. It can't be also to a level that it adds so much friction that you get MFA fatigue and it slows down the system, right? It's a balance of friction and access. That's what we need to have while we think about Zero Trust.
No, that's definitely, and thanks for that, Shahrokh. So when you think, and you mentioned few things that organizations usually deal with, right? You have Zero Trust and identity, so you can't really solve one with the other, and then you have Zero Trust at network layers, and you need to think a little bit about Zero Trust at device level, and so on. So there's a bunch of components that come in enterprise that they have to deal with, and you mentioned one of them is like you can't really go to nth degree trust but verify to the point where people not going to be comfortable coming to work and say, well, forget about it. It's like by the time I get to access my application, I have to spend half an hour going and jumping through all the hoops before I get there, and then guess what? The moment I step away, I have to jump through all the hoops again because nobody trusts me again and everything has to be reestablished.
Right.
So it's complete different paradigm and trust model that we have built for over the years in the environment where enterprises are operating. So when you think about it, it's like, where would you say organizations would be the best way to start? With Zero Trust, is it like go all the way down to the sort of bowels and start building from devices, or start from the users? Because that's, in my mind, where experience begins.
There is actually, you need to have a ground truth and root of trust. And for that reason, many of us, we believe that root of trust needs to come from the devices, from the endpoints, basically the perimeter. And if you classify the devices as your perimeter or the browsers as your perimeter, and then as a result, you take a look at, have a network view, you need to establish that perimeter through the network coming in, and which means it is your device, it is your browser, it is your network, it is your VPN, and you establish that source, that trust chain from the far left, starting on the left, instead of just focusing on SSO and IDP and then identity and MFA. On the other side of the spectrum, when I say that we need to shift left to the perimeter, which is the network and the devices and the endpoints, we also need to shift right on the other side of the spectrum, where the center is the IDP and identity access management, where we post-authorization, we need to basically take a look at how post-authorization we can detect anomalies and abnormalities, because if you don't, then all the evil happens post-authorization, right? It doesn't matter how much, whether you have access to my bank account, it matters if you can withdraw money out of my bank account. Both IRS and your bank and many others, federal agencies know how much money you have. The issue here is about ability to take money out of your account or not, which is the data protection that we're all about, right? So in my opinion, organizations need to look at this with in a holistic view of how vulnerable they are from their network level, starting from their VPN, their CDN, their browsers, their websites, then to endpoints, and all the way to identity access management and IDP and SSO, and then how do they manage the identities? And again, I'm repeating myself, but it just doesn't stop there. It doesn't start at the edge. It doesn't start at the door. It also continues inside, right? When the person is inside your house, you also want to monitor, because people do go rogue, right? Good employees become a risk to companies. Inside threat has always been the problem. And sometimes credentials are lifted, and assumed claim identity can result in a disastrous event post-authorization. So you need to basically have a blanket of zero trust across.
Right. It's like, Shahrokh, how would you explain to the audience, let's say, when you talked about credentials lifted, and that's accounts takeover right now, for a big problem, right? So in zero trust model, how does it go away? So how would those credentials not being able to be stolen, and somebody not being able to pretend they're who they're not, and then access all the resources on the network?
Well, as you know, today is the global password day. And it is funny that we're sitting here.
That's right. It's been around for 50 years, I think. People have been using it and still happy with the passwords.
So my answer to you is, the very first step is to get rid of the weakest component of our infrastructure, of our access management infrastructure, which is the password. We are trained as IT professionals that there are three elements of something you have, something you know, and someone you are, as the three pillars of identity and management. And if you follow those three and you can get at least two of them done, then account takeovers can be eliminated. The very first step for account takeovers is actually get rid of passwords, because it is a low-hanging fruit. It doesn't mean that if you have credentials, or you have a security key or a RFID badge, or you're passwordless and you use a push notification to multi-factor yourself, you're still protected. That yet is a binary authentication. We just need to reinvent our thinking about not treating access management as a binary and authentication as a binary event. So what do they need to do? First, just get rid of the low-hanging fruit, which today on a password day, every year we get reminded, and every day we get reminded that passwords are weak, and yet it's 2022 and we have 20 plus billions of identities and credentials that are in the wild available to the bad guys.
So something like, in other words, to say something that you don't have cannot be stolen.
Exactly.
So if you don't know it, you don't have it, it's for threat actors, there is nothing to steal.
If the threat actor cannot replay something that you have, or something you know, or the combination of it, then the threat surface reduces and shrinks to smaller and smaller. If you don't have passwords, then nobody can take over your passwords. Can someone take over your phone and as a device that can be your authenticator? Yes. But the probability of that is much lower, because they need to physically get access to your phone. Can someone take your biometric? Now, that's a little bit more possible, because biometrics are liftable. Everybody talks about biometric and everything. There's a problem with biometric if you travel to China, and even if you travel within US today, with the massive amount of cameras and the intelligence that is behind the camera, there's not really, right now that I say this, you already have my fingerprint, right? Because of the resolution of the camera. And obviously my face is already public, right? It's like thinking about your license plate, that my license plate is my protection. And that's how you need to think about, is biometric sufficient? But you're absolutely right. It is, if you don't have it, then it cannot be stolen.
So Shahrokh, thank you for that. And like, if you think of terms right now, all this concept is great, but you looking back, we used passwords for 40 plus years, and then we built everything around them. And now the first thing comes in when we talk about auditors. They come in and they start looking for, okay, show me the strengths of your password, how many characters, combination of whatever letters you have, and so on. So how do you bring them into this conversation and explain to them, like, well, password disappears. So what do they need to audit right now? What do they need to look for to say, yes, I think the company is still in a good shape, they cannot be owned, versus writing out the audit findings like, hey, they don't use password, it's completely toast, so next.
It's auditors and the compliance world is the necessary evil. And what is funny is that most of us in the IT business, we are not driven by our manifesto of improving the platform, but actually compliance with and responding to the auditor's report, which is based, to your point, to a 60-year-old technology, which is called password. It is not that passwords are not how should I call it? They haven't served us for the last 60 years. They have done their job.
Yeah.
But now they need to be replaced and augmented. And perhaps the word is augmented is a better way. Because if you think about passwords and replacing them, to your point, if the checklist says you need to have a 12-character password and you tell the auditors that I don't have a password, there's a big red on your on the compliance report and everything else. And if you're a financial institutions, I don't think that for the next 5 years they can literally go 100% passwordless. Fantastic thing about AD, and then B, if you replace it with a certificate, again, the certificate can be lifted, very similar. Yep. The art and science here is about a combination of the 4 factors that you have, right? It is something you know, something you have, someone you are, and then on top of that, something you do. So there's a 4th pillar that needs to be introduced into our psyche of our, to the IT's psyche, that says there is a 4th leg here, which is the behavior. And for that reason, behavioral modeling is actually the next generation of authentication. This is actually very normal. It's like humans, right? You know people's faces, you know their names and everything else. But what prompts you to detect anomalies and abnormalities is their behavior. You know when I'm happy because you have seen me many times with you. We have we have spent some times together, and you know when I'm off and I'm abnormal, right? And for that reason, you say, Shahrokh, are you okay? That's what we need to do. We need to reinvent authentication to a level that we can basically combine the old with something new and something blue, right? The something blue happens to be behavioral modeling. Something new is you don't have to rely on the good old passwords anymore or the traditional binary authentication. And binary authentication is not just password. It's also MFA. Right. Your biometric is a binary authentication. It just, you compare it with a single event and you get a result of yes or no. Right. But the behavior is a continuum.
No, it's great. So I think given all what you said and probably having this conversation with others, will have to go through several iterations before they build their level of comfort to say, yes, we need to figure it out. Because I think all the time they try to build some form of testing mechanism behind, so they know actually whatever concept you introduced, good or bad, it's actually working the way they expect them. So if somebody has to type password 100%, that's how it's supposed to be. So if this concept of passwordless authentication works and and works in a way that it's supposed to work, so they should be able to build some kind of model where they reliably can test. So is there something that you would suggest they can do?
So I think it is I think it's the responsibility of the IT community to basically work with the auditors and with the compliance people, with NIST and OASIS and other organizations, to re-educate ourselves and set new rules. We basically need to reinvent this process and don't go after what we have been doing for the last 60 years, because obviously it's not working anymore. So I think there is a piece of education, and then there is also some sort of a metering mechanism to demonstrate that yes, you can be passwordless and actually be 10x more secure. it's the efficacy of the solutions that we need to showcase to the auditors and create new categories of meeting the requirements of the financial institution, the public organization that we need to have, your healthcare provider. We need to go back to the old concept and the basics and 101 of level of assurance. Don't focus on the method of establishing level of assurance, but establish a good measurement to measure the efficacy of the level of assurance that 1, 2, or 3 methods of authentication give you. And by the way, I want to just say this because this always comes up. More factors doesn't mean you're more
Correct.
secure, right?
Yes.
It's mathematically, this is what many people make a mistake. It's not a summation, it's a multiplication.
Yeah, let's
If you
do
have
10 factors.
Yeah,
Gonna
let's
fix
do.
all the problems.
Actually, it's funny if the audience goes to 11factor.com, you'll see that how we make fun of it. That back in the days that I was running Accepto, that we said we make the most frictioned Accepto. We make the most frictioned experience of your access management, and you have 11 factors to do it. That's actually absolutely dead wrong, because with more factors, you guarantee that you're going to lock yourself out. One day your biometric on your laptop might not work, and your password, you're not going to remember it, and you're going to add like 5, 6 factors together. You're going to get locked out, which is going to be a very, very bad experience, especially if it is your CEO that you're locking out, right?
You'll probably forget by the time you get logged in why you were trying to log in. So I think what you're trying to say and alluding to, it's we need to educate them and tell them not what they need to test, the reason why we have that.
Right.
Because why we have password, the testing password where somebody can authenticate to the system. It's the same thing. If you change one method for the other, you change the why. So are we still reliably allowing somebody to get into the system and to do whatever they need to do? So I think it's the core concept there.
That why is key, Nikolai, because we all get locked up with the checkboxes, and our thinking gets narrowed down to, this is a checkbox, do you have it or you don't have it? And by the time that you explain, but if you go back and make the requirement not on the length of the password, not on the strength, but on definition of the level of assurance from 1 to 4 or 1 to 3, and then say, this is what the requirement is for level of assurance, and these are the methods that you can get together in order to achieve that level of assurance. So the education of our auditors, and I say it, and this is on the recording, with all the respect that I have for the compliance folks and the auditors, they run the show for us in the IT community, but at the same time, we need to go back to the whiteboard and reinvent this concept of what are we really looking for? And that goes back to your first opening remark, zero trust. That's what we're looking for. Doesn't matter whether it is password, or if it is a push notification, or it is behavioral authentication, or it is a security key. It needs to meet the level of assurance.
Yep, that's definitely the answer. So one thing that on my mind, and when you introduce the concept, let's say passwordless authentication, zero trust, it's easy to sell this to IT. IT folks, they love technology. So you bring new concept and they're willing to try. Versus you go into business community, their IT concept, they don't really care. So some of them do, but most of them, it's like, look, I'm here to do my business. Can you make me to get where I'm going in a way that is comfortable, convenient, and I can access my application whenever I need to without really jumping through 10 hoops before I get to application, and then by the time I get to it, I already forgot what I was trying to do in application. So how would this concept, let's say passwordless, because on the surface to me it seems like it's a slam dunk. If I show it to somebody else and I'm telling them, it's like, you don't need to type password. You just walk in and all of a sudden magic happens and your application can be open. Have you seen it, or how in your mind this can evolve and how users can perceive it? Whereas somebody's like, hey, I still need to remember something. I want to type something because I'm really scared of this new technologies that may introduce something that I don't know, and if I don't have it, how can I trust it that it's going to do what it's supposed to?
So this is very interesting, actually. I was having a discussion about this probably about a year ago, and it might have been actually on the Password Day with Jim Roth, the ex-global CSO of CVS and MassMutual. And he brought up a very good point on that conversation. For us humans, it's very hard to unlearn things. God knows that my wife keeps telling me about my habit of leaving the kitchen cabinets open all the time, and I can't unlearn that thing that I learned to close the cabinets after I take something out. The reason I bring this up, that this is an unlearning that needs to happen. The unlearning of the old habits is tough, right? You tell when you say the business folks, they come and say, okay, you can't do this, you can't go passwordless, is because when you're in banking and you're a financial institution and the core of your product that you're selling is you're telling them to give your hard-earned money, and they will protect it and they will save it for you and everything else, and then all of a sudden you tell the customers that they no longer need to log in and use a password, and it's magical, as you call it.
Yeah, and then somebody would ask, if I don't have to log in, what if somebody else doesn't have to log in and gets to my account?
And again, this goes back to the same thing that applies to our auditors and compliance people, is about educating. And perhaps this is why the Password Day exists. The Password Day exists because all of us remember what is the job of the password, which is protection, right, and why the framework of zero trust. And so the unlearning and the compliance to the business needs, which the business needs is the fundamental of what we call access management. It's called access and management, access and control. They're naturally opposing each other. It's like a door, and you say, I want the door, but I want to also go through it because I want to prevent the air, the bad air to come in, the people that they shouldn't come in to come in and everything else, but at the same time I want it to be frictionless. Now let me give you the analog in the physical space. We are all, for decades, we are used to glass doors opening in front of us. It is access and management. At nighttime, they get locked. During business hours, if it is a business that requires people to go in, it opens up automatically as soon as an object is in front of it. Now, how to identify that object, right? Yeah. How to make sure that the bad guys don't get in. Now that goes back to the level of assurance. It goes back to pre-authentication and recognizing if the person. Obviously, if you had a glass door that was going to the bank and somebody is showing up with a mask on in front of their face, covered, let's say pre-COVID days, and they're covered up, maybe the glass door should not open. So it's about cognitive authentication, being able to educate people that there are methods that doesn't require you entering your username and password and you can get it. By the way, you're used to that today. Gen Z are used to that. None of our Gen Z applications, do you use TikTok?
Not really.
Very little, okay. So none of the new apps have a username and password, barely, right? You just log in, it's tied to your device, and if you want to go and your Instagram and everything else, you need to basically, you don't log into them every time, right? It's frictionless. Mm-hmm. It has become frictionless because it is tied to your identity and tied to your device. That's the way we need to do it. So the business folks are looking for one thing: frictionless. Mm-hmm. The word frictionless for them is the most valuable thing. Now, IT folks like us, we need to basically find a way to maintain that zero trust and that security, top-notch security, while we reduce the friction. And once we do that, then for sure the business folks will rally and they will embrace the new technologies that we offer them.
No, that's definitely interesting and I would say fascinating, because unlearning something that people learned over the past decades and several more decades. It's not that easy.
It's not.
I know some people say it's a lot easier to fool somebody than prove them that they've been fooled. So it's kind of similar concept when people learn a lot and then they said, well, something I don't feel comfortable doing it and I don't have this level of trust. So when they embark on this journey, and you talked at length about user experience, and definitely when you talk about frictionless, business is there. They don't like to type passwords, and I know it's been quite an arduous task when we said we're going to introduce second factor. We're going to give users RSA key and taught them how to learn those, and they were not that happy.
Right.
So how many different things I still need to do just to get where I'm going, because I already know who I am. I think this concept may take off, and it's like when, let's say, when you talk about zero trust, and we covered all this concept throughout today's conversation. So when you try to bring all those things together and you would make a recommendation from companies, say, yes, okay, let's have a zero trust and start it with identities. What do they need to watch out? How do they need to approach to say, okay, we need to have some measured way, proactive way to help people understand, to bring auditors together, but not to go there and blow the whole space up and then they say, whoops, I think we introduced a lot more problems that we were trying to solve, and that's usually where technologists fail, when they go in too fast and they introduce the concept, bring it to bear, and companies try it out and they haven't really learned what it's all about, and then all of a sudden you have big flare up and they say, we don't want to use your technology for another 10 years, it'll come back and talk to us then.
I think, Nikolai, you ask a very good question. How do they crawl, walk, run with a new technology so it doesn't backfire and completely sets us back for another decade, going back to the old ways? People buy things when they have pain, to fix the pain, or it makes them happy. So if you apply that concept, that consumers, employees, IT professionals would subscribe to a new way of doing things and going passwordless or frictionless, and how do they trust it? We need to think about what pain do we address and what pleasure do we give them. Unfortunately, IT is a lot of pain for a lot of people, and is the nature of the beast, and that's why most of us are very tense people in the IT community. So the reality of it is that you need to show them what pain you're removing them.
Right.
The pain that we remove is this concept of MFA fatigue. By introducing this concept of passwordless, and yet you don't need to pull your phone every time you log in, is by the fact that you need to carry a RSA token with you, right? So, which means that now you need to have a number of authenticators that can still hit the level of assurance that we talked about earlier, still hits that level of assurance that is needed for that access. If you go to your shopping mall and the glass door opens, that you expect it. But obviously, if you go to a SCIF in Pentagon, you don't want the door open up for you automatically, and anybody can go into anybody's office, right? So, or any SCIF that you go into. So there needs to be some control and associated appropriate friction that comes with it in order to hit that level of assurance that we talked about, in order to measure up to the level of trust that you need to have for your claim identity to have access to the data and to the applications that you need to have. And this is a very, very tough balance, and it takes time. And the only way to do it is having a set of ground truth test cases that says the efficacy of the new system is at parity or better than the previous one from the security perspective, and then it removes the friction by X%. My litmus test, my basic test is if it reduces from 10 steps or 7 steps, I can get to 4 steps, thank you. right?
Yep.
That's
60% improvement.
60% improvement, right? And then there's one other element, actually, I forgot to mention. So it is pain, and it is pleasure, and also there's a cost. You need to look at, the enterprise needs to look at the total amount of money that they spend on passwords, on authentication, on analytics and everything else, and based on that, take a look at the trifecta of friction, cost, and security, right? You need to have higher security, lower friction, and lower cost. And that's the metric that we need to have.
Unfortunately, probably not many companies measure it. It's all those sort of measures they tie to how many times people sort of complain. Somebody complains, that's a pretty big measure. Sort of like the stick goes up, it's like, oh, well, somebody said it's bad, so now we need to fix it. Whether it's like how many users said it's actually good or didn't say anything because they like the technology.
Actually, this is very interesting that you bring this up. We are very fast to judge something based on those who complain about something, and the complaints rightfully needs to be addressed.
Right.
I had an organization that they said that we have, out of the 10,000, they had 300 people, less than 300 people, that they said they absolutely don't want a second factor, whether it is a security key, whether it is an RFID badge with biometric, phone as a factor, right? No, I don't want you to store my biometric on my device either because I don't trust what you're going to do with my biometric. And at the end, the answer was no problem. We love you. And what we're going to do is we're going to make your password to be 21 characters. And naturally, when it's one way or the other, right? So no disrespect for those who don't want to comply with the security of the enterprise and the requirements of the enterprise, because it is, if it is their own devices and they don't want to use it and everything else, that's fine. But you need to establish that level of assurance, and then if you're not taking the tools that we are giving you and none of them are working for you, then we need to apply the good old password that has been there for 60 years, right? So again, you have to cater to almost everyone, to the auditors, to the compliance folks, to the business folks, to the consumers that they don't want any friction, yet they want to feel secure and whatnot. And remember, security is a feeling.
That's right.
You can feel secure and you're not, or you can be secure and you don't feel it. So it's a tough act for us IT folks.
Yeah, that's very true. And thinking like what you just mentioned, if let's say you get rid of passwords and people got used to technology, and then all of a sudden one of the factors came back and say, well, I need to verify your password. Probably not many people say, you kidding me? It's like, I haven't been used that thing for years now.
Oh,
it's like, what was it?
Yeah, this is the fallback to password. I mean, we had a project, as I mentioned earlier. I worked for Intel for 25 years. We had a project in late 2000s called YAP, You're the Password, which actually turned out to become eventually the Microsoft's Windows Hello. And but at the end, if for some reason your biometric doesn't work or the device doesn't work, it falls back on the password. Now, go figure, right? Yeah. This goes back to my comment of it is very hard to unlearn.
So Shahrokh, we've talked a lot about all these concepts and technologies, and I'm sure people will gonna embark on this journey. So one thing that I haven't asked yet, how is your technology or the company that you work for so many years and build it up, how would it help with this journey, and what would it do to make this journey easier for people?
We actually, thank you. The work that we have done and the technologies that we have an umbrella of, they have a platform approach, but at the same time they think about modularity, because the reality of you going and ripping and replacing everything in an enterprise is unrealistic, and actually every CISO is going to laugh at us if we say we're going to go replace everything you have. So what we have done is we have built in the network of a zero trust infrastructure, we have built subcomponents that they can individually establish a higher level of trust, a lower level of friction, and a lower level of cost for them. And what we have done is we basically start at all the way from the perimeter, from the secure boot on your workstations and laptops and whatnot, and your mobile devices, or at the browser level when you launch your IDP. We basically establish what we call a device trust and device ID. And that way we are controlling the perimeter. Remember earlier I was talking about the perimeter, the authentication, and then post-authorization. So that way we can basically go to an enterprise and enable them to establish root of trust at the endpoint. And I classify the browser also as an endpoint, and that's a very important point that I like to make, is the portal and the entry to your digital journey is via the device or the browser. It's one of the two.
Right.
You either have a VDI that is coming or a IDP SSO that you do through the browser, or you establish your trust by logging into your workstation, and then you VPN, and then you go into your workspace. So what we have done is we have built that element, and then once, if you use that or you don't use it, then at the authentication level, we make sure that the claim identities are truly belong to the rightful owners. And this basically uses the traditional 3 elements plus a 4th vector that I mentioned, the 4th leg of authentication, which is behavioral modeling. So what's something you have, something you know, something you are, and something you do. And the something you do actually strengthens that. And actually most of our customers, they actually embrace that because they recognize that the behavior and characteristic of their employees and their consumers and customers are very unique, right, yet which can be differentiating and which can identify the bad actors from the good actors. So, and then there's a 3rd element that our company has done, SecureAuth has done, is the concept of post-authorization and continuous authentication. We sit on a sea of massive amount of data that the enterprise collects. And what we do today is we feed that into our SIM, and the SIM gives us a beautiful dashboard. And then when we have a breach, 8 months, sometimes 4 years, you remember the Marriott case, 4 years later, you go back and recognize that you have been breached for 4 years. That is the other element that our company has built, which actually leverages the data as a major asset, both for user and group level anomaly detection, to feed back to pre-auth and at auth in order to guarantee this continuum. So it has been a very good journey, and we do have early adopters, and one of the key things on how to educate this, just like the auditors, just like the users, just like the business, we also need to have evangelists in the IT community, CISOs that are frontiers on using new technologies, and they just don't rely on the analyst, 5-year-old analysis of old technologies, but they are in the process of adopting new technologies and trying them out to get these evangelists to advertise what value this new technology gives and how much it improves their efficacy of their access and control.
Got it. No, definitely. And again, I'm user actually of your technology as well.
I'm proud that you're a user of our technology. So every time that I see the company's name and your name come up and everything else, and we see that we are part of your protection, it makes me very proud. So thank you.
And I know people in security, they love it too, but the question that they came up before, that's one of the things when sometimes it doesn't work and you have to remember password. It's like,
how do I do
when
that?
was the last time I typed my password and now I have to figure it out where it is.
Exactly.
So, but definitely, and I think one of the things that as we come into an end of this episode and Cyber Talk with Nikolai, so one question that I typically ask, if you have any fun story to tell from your previous experience in using your technology or doing something else that the audience?
Funny stories in IT, they happen every day. So actually there is one in the context of today being the Password Day. So let me share this with you. We were working with one of our darling customers, and very large organization, 100,000 plus employees, and we were working on a project called Enterprise Name Passwordless. The CISO is a avant-garde, very forward-thinking evangelist of passwordless and continuous authentication and analytics in general, use of data science. And as we were getting close to the final stages of the project, one of the project managers came and asked us to add password as one of the factors. We had 13 factors already that were covering every combination that you can imagine, but the project manager requested that we add password as a fallback factor. And it was funny because the whole project was called Passwordless. And naturally, I escalated not only to the internal team. We had a very good discussion, healthy discussion about this. I also raised it to the CISO, and I asked, what would you like me to do, right? We're at the final stage and all that. And we kind of went back and forth, and we took a look at the risk and the reasons for it. And we basically made our passwordless project to fall back on passwords. So, but now the passwords are 15 characters rather than the 8 that they were used to. So, and it's a passphrase sort of, since it is longer and easier to remember. But that said, we actually orchestrated it that you only use password as a factor when you are in a known device on your own network at home. Your phone is in your proximity, so forth and so on. So you use a lot of analytics in order to allow that password to be used. Not in the wild, the password still cannot be used. But it was funnier than hell to make the project that was called Passwordless to be passworded. So happy Password Day. I thought that this probably stands out more than anything else.
Yeah, there you go.
In the history of the company.
If all fails, use password.
Yes, but a passphrase or a long password, right?
Yep.
And on your known machine, and not
right.
in the wild, not from the web, right?
Yep. If it all fails, use your old password.
Happy Password Day.
All right. So I'd like to wrap at this point. So thank you, Shahrokh, for all your insights on the zero trust and passwordless authentication. It's definitely a lot of organizations will embark on, and they will try to implement the best they can. But as we discussed, zero trust is not a thing you can buy. It's a rather long journey that organizations need to plan carefully and bring users on board, bring their executive management, and bring their favorite group of people, auditors, and internal and external, to make it successful. So with that said, I'd like to thank all our audience. Thank you for participation and being with us, and continue to dial in and listen. And please, as I always close my thoughts, we are stronger together. Thank you very much.